Pope Benedict XVI is dead. An 800-year-old prophecy is set to be unleashed.
Is the prophecy true? The signs are literally all around us.
The prophecy foretells the coming of the final Pope and the end of time.
The book of Daniel speaks of judgment coming on the earth, a resurrection of the dead. No flesh will be saved.
He who takes the Holy Crown after Benedict shall be named Petrus Romanus.
He will actually be the false prophet of biblical fame that helps give rise to the Antichrist.
Written over 800 years ago by an Irish monk named Malachi, the prophecy of the popes predicts the end of time. Could that end be upon us?
This is going to be a time of the greatest tribulation in world history. In fact, the Bible tells us that a third of the Earth's population will be destroyed.
Apocalyptic prophecy is generally sincere. True believers really do feel that they are reading Scripture correctly and prophesying what is to come.
Warnings about the end of time have always been with us. But as humanity charts its course into a new millennium, are we facing a real-life apocalypse?
There are natural disasters, earthquakes, famines, pestilence around the world. There are man-made disasters, which we're seeing right now. These are all warning signs that the end times may have arrived.
You know, the Christian message is that man is fallen and sinful and that we need a Redeemer, a Savior. It's pretty clear from the text that when Jesus returns, that he is going to judge humanity.
People who believe in apocalyptic prophecies generally perceive the world in terms of good and evil only, with no gray shades. They tend to feel that the world is going to hell in a handcart and that everything is going wrong and nothing is being rectified.
An ancient prophecy exists that raises questions about the future of mankind.
Well, the prophecy of the popes is a list of 112 phrases. At first glance, some of them seem vague, but upon investigation, there seem to be some very compelling reasons to believe that this is a true prophecy.
Here we have a list written in Latin by a simple monk that accurately tracks the lines of popes from his time to ours over an 800-year period with what can only be described as miraculous precision.
From a historical critical perspective, these stories are medieval legends. They're not biblical truth.
It is said that a true prophet is one who has heard the word of God. Did God choose a simple Irish monk named Malachi to deliver his apocalyptic warnings to the world?
Malachi O'Morgare was a bishop in Armagh, which is now in Northern Ireland. And of course it was his dream, like it was many faithful in that day, to travel to Rome to meet the Pope.
Malachi leaves Ireland on June 12, 1139. His small party won't arrive in Rome until May of the following year. An epic journey across a dark and dangerous continent.
During the 1100s, the world was a brutal place. There were plagues, there was violence, so traveling from Ireland to Rome was an extremely dangerous journey.
Throughout the journey, Malachi claims to feel the presence of God guiding him and giving him strength. But when he at last reaches Rome, he is in for an unpleasant surprise.
Malachi has just completed this 11-month journey across Europe. He has seen the most heart-rending conditions. poverty immeasured. And now he arrives in Rome, and probably the last thing that he expects to see is the opulence that surrounds the Pope.
Malachi is furious. How could such extravagance exist in the church? How could Pope Innocent II allow such indulgence in his own house? Retreating to the hills overlooking the great city, Malachi is overcome with emotion.
Propter impietatum summorum pontificum, Roma mos excura.
Nobody knows for sure what happened to St. Malachi, but something did happen, because he began to write a series of 112 Latin verses or mottos, each of them describing every pope that would exist, from Pope Innocent II to the final pope.
And so, in anger and disgust, this simple monk creates the prophecy of the popes. The document also spells out what will happen once the list of popes comes to an end. The destruction of Rome.
So when a prophet like Malachi says that Rome will burn or collapse, he means the entire system will be destroyed, because he sees it as evil, as being degenerate and in need of correction by God.
But in what way will Rome meet its end?
There are many horrible ways in which a very large part of the global community could be wiped off the face of the earth.
In 1140, an Irish monk named Malachi travels to Rome to meet the Pope. Shocked and upset by the luxury and opulence he finds, Malachi writes a prophecy that predicts the line of popes for over 800 years. But is it true?
About 3 years after Malachi returned to Ireland, Pope Innocent, whom he had met with, died in 1143. And the pope that replaced him was known as Celestine II, whose family had a castle in Umbria on the banks of the Tiber. Why that's interesting is because in the prophecy of the popes, it said that this numbered pope would come from a castle on the Tiber.
We can really just look to the last 4 popes and see some astonishing examples of accuracy. Paul VI, his motto was flower of flowers. His coat of arms features 3 flowers, the symbol of the French monarchy. John Paul I, from the midst of the moon. He was born in the diocese of Belluno, which means beautiful moon, and he ascended to the papacy during a half moon and then died 1 lunar cycle later. John Paul II, from the labor of the sun. Not only was he born during a solar eclipse, he was buried during a solar eclipse. The motto for our current pope was from the glory of the olive. Many Catholic scholars were expecting a pope to come from the Benedictine order, symbolized by an olive branch. Cardinal Ratzinger, who was not a Benedictine, was elected pope. But then, to the astonishment of everyone, he picked his papal name as Benedict.
According to Malachi's prophecy, Pope Benedict's death will trigger an Armageddon, as described in the books of Daniel and Revelation.
Around the world today, prophetic signs seem to be unfolding at breakneck pace. These also seem to coincide now with the waning years of Pope Benedict's reign.
People who view the world through apocalyptic lenses generally understand natural disasters as punishment for sin or for wickedness. And so, in the case of an earthquake or a tsunami, they feel that God has actually intervened in the natural order.
In the past decade, there's been a significant amount of increase in earthquake activity. 10 years ago, about 1,500 earthquakes a year. Today, you're looking at more like 2,000 earthquakes a year.
I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake, the sun turned black. Some scientists predict the coming of a massive quake with a magnitude never before seen, 10 plus on the Richter scale.
If a mega earthquake were to occur, violent shaking of the ground would destroy every building. All roads, transportation, power lines, gas lines, water lines would be severed.
I don't think people can fathom the effect of a Category 10 earthquake. It would take out entire cities, millions of tons of falling buildings, thousands of deaths. It would be a massive catastrophe with a massive death toll.
Revelation 8:5 talks about an angel taking a cauldron of fire and pouring it out on the earth. The results of that are said to be lightning, flashes, thunder, earthquakes.
True believers in apocalyptic prophecy generally see everything in the world around them, including any kind of natural disaster, as a sign of God's displeasure if it's catastrophic.
But increased earthquake activity does seem to threaten humanity, including earthquakes we can't see or hear. The tsunami that devastates Japan in 2011 is the direct result of a massive underwater earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale. This is the 4th largest earthquake ever recorded, and scientists believe that still more powerful quakes await. But as far as Armageddons go, earthquakes are just the opening attraction. The real destructive power of the Earth's crust still waits to be unleashed. The prophecy of the popes tells us that with the death of Pope Benedict XVI and the election of Petrus Romanus, Rome will burn.
Apocalyptic prophets like Malachi from the 10th century on are prophesying against Rome because of what they see as its opulence, its power, the arrogance and greed of the high churchmen.
Scholars call this period of time the pornocracy. It's characterized by corruption, all sorts of immoral activity. The papacy had degraded and became guilty of all sorts of unchristian types of things.
When the apocalyptic prophets talk about Rome, they talk about punishment for what they perceive as wickedness here on earth. And they're not thinking about future punishment a long time from now. They're thinking about future punishment today or tomorrow. They see the apocalypse as something necessary.
Will this necessary apocalypse include even greater dangers lurking deep beneath the Earth's crust?
Large earthquakes and other seismic events can trigger volcanic eruptions. These volcanic eruptions can be dangerous and unpredictable.
In April and May of 2010, Iceland's YHWH volcano erupted, throwing ash and steam high into Earth's atmosphere. Consisting of ash and molten glass that damages aircraft engines, the volcanic plume virtually shut down northern European airspace. And YHWH was a relatively small eruption. Much larger eruptions are possible.
A supervolcano or a supervolcanic eruption is a term used to describe an eruption which blasts over 1,000 cubic kilometers of material. This is an eruption we've not seen before during our time.
In the heart of the American West, a well-known and well-loved attraction has the power to kill 1 billion people or more.
One good example of a supervolcano is actually at Yellowstone National Park, where there's thousands of tourists going there every year without realizing that they are walking on top of a supervolcano.
The Yellowstone supervolcano's next eruption is overdue.
Following a supervolcano of that size would cause so much air pollution, it would affect farming, and over a long part of time, it would affect the economy of the country and eventually the world.
The supervolcano at Yellowstone National Park is likely to erupt sometime in the future. And because of this, scientists are carefully monitoring the area to actually look for signs which might be an early warning system in terms of future eruption. So we monitor earthquakes, ground deformation, gas composition, and use this to try and help predict when the volcano would erupt.
8 centuries ago, the aging prophet Malachi struggles with bleak visions of the future. He foresees deadly calamities as described in the book of Revelation. Destruction, death, and disease spreading across the earth.
Revelation 6:8 speaks of the fourth horseman of the apocalypse who rides on a pale horse, who's associated with pestilence and death.
Could the end of mankind include diseases passed from person to person? An invisible killer?
A virus is one of the simplest life forms. It's transmitted usually from human to human through touch, through aerosol sneezing, through touching objects that other people have touched before you.
The deadliest plague in human history began in the United States in 1918. The Great Influenza lasted less than 2 years, but infected 500 million people from every country on the planet.
So you had high transmission rate. It was highly communicable, but it wasn't too deadly. So it killed a lot of people back then, but not as many as the virus today would kill.
If the Great Influenza could travel so efficiently in the era of steamships and locomotives, how quickly could a new world epidemic spread? Will we be able to overcome a viral superbug?
If antibiotic resistance evolves beyond the human ability to fight it off, it could potentially wipe out the entire human race.
"800 years ago, in the hills above Rome, an Irish monk named Malachi writes a prophecy that traces a path to a catastrophic end of existence. Malachi knows from his reading of the Bible that when the end times come, an unstoppable pestilence, the most deadly ever known, will cover the earth. In 2011, Dutch virologists experimenting with a killer H5N1 strain managed to create a new version of the virus, every bit as deadly but far more contagious than the original. And worst of all, their new virus is airborne.
In the Netherlands, Dr. Ron Fouché was able to create an influenza virus that was transmitted very efficiently and also killed very efficiently, between 60 and 70%.
The new influenza that they're producing in the laboratories today can kill 1 out of every 2 people. They're deadly. Should that virus get out, it would kill billions of people across the world. There isn't a government anywhere that's prepared for a pandemic of that level.
This virus is not going to be a respecter of persons. You're going to have leaders of nations that are going to die. You're going to have systems coming unhinged, the military coming unhinged.
At the beginning, people won't realize how bad it is or how deadly the virus is until the vaccines don't work, and then people start dying.
There would be anarchy, people rioting in the streets. It would be chaos as the world has never seen before.
If such a supervirus were unleashed today, the world's greatest medical minds would be powerless to stop it. Could Malachi's prediction that Rome will burn find its deadliest manifestation in the release of this superbug?
Such an organism would truly overwhelm our ability to fight it off, resulting in billions of deaths worldwide.
I will heap upon them one disaster after another, pangs of hunger, ravages of plague, and bitter pestilence. With the threat of destruction, inevitable earthquakes, unstable volcanoes, and unstoppable viruses, the future of civilization appears fragile. If the prophecy is true, All it will take is the death of Pope Benedict and the election of Petrus Romanus as Pope to bring our way of life tumbling down.
Is the prophecy true? There's 800 years of evidence that these predictions are tracking towards an accurate moment in time.
Despite centuries of hard work from the Enlightenment through the detailed, careful science of the 19th and 20th centuries to explain natural phenomena such as earthquakes, plagues, tsunamis, you name it, some people still choose to believe that these things are not the result of natural mechanisms, but are the result of God's wrath being visited on a sinful and wicked world.
According to the prophecy, there will be no answer that man can come up with that's going to stop the spread of this end times plague. Think what you will, be as skeptical as you like, but the time of great tribulation is already at hand. In the next few years, maybe even months.
Malachi's prophecy of the popes and the destruction of Rome it envisions will be proven or disproven very soon. For some, the end truly is near.
If Pope Benedict dies or is somehow otherwise replaced by Petrus Romanus, the end is here and there's nothing anybody can do about it.